Good evening, and thanks for joining us for this star-studded celebration of National Coming Out Day. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself and where you're joining us from. As for me, my name is Nora Peel. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Literary Programs for the Bay Area Book Festival. The BABF is pleased to be one of the beneficiaries of this evening's free will donation, along with the SF LGBT Center. Thanks to those of you who have already made a donation when you registered for this free event. If you feel so moved to support either or both of these organizations, or just to learn more about the work we do and how you can get involved, we'll put those links in the chat. One quick note. We're allowing time later in the program for audience questions, but part of the beauty of virtual events is that you don't need to wait until then to ask your question. So just use the Q&A button on your screen at any time to enter any questions you have for the panelists. We'll collect them all and share them at the appropriate time in our program. I know we're all, myself included, eager to get tonight's conversations underway, so I'm pleased to introduce tonight's host. Kathleen Archambeau is a longtime LGBTQ activist, a native San Franciscan, and an award-winning author of several books. Most recently, and most relevantly for tonight's event, Kathleen is the author of Pride and Joy, LGBTQ Artists, Icons, and Everyday Heroes, which has been receiving rave reviews. This book, along with the books of several of our panelists, is available through our bookstore partner for tonight's event, San Francisco's Green Apple Books. We'll put the link to purchase the titles in the chat as well. And now I'm pleased to turn things over to Kathleen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to National Coming Out Day. This is a celebration, and we're very fortunate to have our icons and artists and authors from around the world. The first one is Sidney Grant, coming to us from New York City. His nickname is Dr. Dance. He taught Julia Roberts and Marcia Gay Harden how to dance for Mona Lisa Smile and was featured in Mad Hot Ballroom. He then went on he was an Argentine tango champion. He was part of the first gay couple to make it to the finals of Argentinian tango. And he has since taught 25,000 public school students in New York City, line dancing, ballroom, and Latin dancing. He lives in Spanish Harlem and speaks Spanish. And welcome, Sidney.
Hello, Kathleen. It's so nice to see you. I'm really honored to be among the esteemed LGBTQ panelists to celebrate National Coming Out Day. I'm humbled to be among those whom Kathleen profiled in her wonderful book, Pride and Joy. And you know, when we consider those two words as a counterpoint to the almost terrifying reality of coming out, it gives us solace, and for some of us, purpose. When Kathleen first asked me to join today's panel, she sent along a list of questions to consider. The first of which was, how do you feel your work in the arts has contributed to humanity's evolution and the LGBTQ community? And while her additional questions, of course, had their respective merit, this first question resonated very deeply with me, especially when we contemplate the history and the torturous treatment of homosexuals throughout the ages. The examples are many, and one has to ask oneself, where is the humanity when we stigmatize humans just because of whom they love? And frankly, we are quite privileged to live here in the United States, where we've seen not only domestic partnership, but gay marriage, when there's many countries where homosexuality is still criminalized, and can even, I believe, in 6 or 7, the death penalty is still possible. So as a professional ballroom dancer, what I'd just like to share with everybody is that I'm keenly aware of the heterosexist history of my artistic discipline. And so I took tremendous pride to meaningfully borrow that word again from Kathleen's book title, in the fact that in 2011, I was the first openly gay man to win the USA Argentine Tango Championship. And my female partner and I, at the time, donated all of the proceeds to my nonprofit, Ballroom Basics USA. And as you said, Kathleen, thank you very much. We have taught over 25,000 students in more than 150 schools across all 5 boroughs of New York City. And it gives me tremendous pride to deliver this non-competitively so that every child dancing rotationally and respectfully with one another can feel validated. And it gives a space, an opening for students who are beginning to identify whether it's their orientation or identity as they dance with each and every classmate. Because although we've seen a lot of progress with, gay straight alliances and a number of other affirmative, you see the LGBTQ posters in all the schools, but I ask myself, what can I do as an artist to make a difference? And if you actually have children eye to eye, hand in hand, and arm in arm, dancing one to the next, you are creating a space of equanimity among all students, regardless of their identity. So it's very, it's very meaningful to me to do this work and very meaningful for me to be here. I am live from the Metropolitan Club in New York City. I don't know if you hear the dance music in the background, but there's actually music playing. And I'm happy to take a question or two, Kathleen, before I get back on the dance floor.
Well, Sidney, I'm going to ask that you get back on the dance floor and get back to your real life. And thank you so much for being here.
It was actually absolutely thrilling to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Nora, and thank you, panelists, and have a wonderful rest of the evening.
You too. Now I'd like to introduce another illustrious, acclaimed blind mezzo-soprano, Laurie Gale Rubin-Taira. Laurie is a graduate of Oberlin. She's also a graduate of Yale, and she's done so many things. I can't even keep up with her. She and her wife, Jenny, founded an arts program in Hawaii called Hohana Arts, and Hohana stands for family. And Laurie Gale Rubin is also the mother of 3 children and the author of a memoir called Do You Dream in Color? Insights from a Girl Without Sight. So without further ado, Laurie, take it away.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Happy National Coming Out Day, everybody. So thrilled to be here. Where to start? I think I'm going to spend most of my time on my coming out story, but yes, and you mentioned pretty much everything else I would have talked about. I wrote my book because there was so much misunderstanding about the mystery word blindness. One of the 3, we always say the 3 fears that we have are public speaking, blindness, and death. I haven't experienced one of those, but I've experienced both public speaking and blindness, and they're not as bad as people think. But, I wanted to dispel the stereotypes, and I wanted to share sort of through, sort of a voyeuristic view of what it is to be a blind person. And so that's why I wrote my memoir. As a blind 30-something living in New York. That was a while back. My brother, he always introduces me as his blind lesbian opera singer sister. And I also can add Jewish to that, being a woman. So I've experienced a lot of being marginalized, a lot of being a minority, and I love every single one of my little titles or little adjectives, little descriptors. My coming out story was really interesting, actually. My brother paved the way for me. He came out first. He actually came out to me when I was in 9th grade. He was in college, and we went to go see the movie Hocus Pocus. And I bring that up only because Hocus Pocus 2 is now out and it's all the rage. After Hocus Pocus, he told me he was gay, and I was relieved because I was thinking, oh my gosh, my brother and I were very close, and I was thinking, oh, I can't find a boy like my brother, and I want, like all the boys are not like my brother. And then so I was like very relieved. that he was gay, and I was also relieved that because that meant that there was no other girl that would take my place. Yeah, so we were very close. And when he came out to my dad, it was pre-planned because we knew that my dad wasn't going to have an easy time with it. And so my dad actually almost disowned my brother. It was a very difficult time. He threatened my brother with a lot of things, including that he said that he would kill himself and that the blood would be on my brother's hands, all kinds of terrifying things. So I learned actually that maybe coming out wasn't the thing that I wanted to do for my brother knew, my dad, my mom knew. I figured this out when I was in college. I dated my first girlfriend in college and realized this is why I never liked boys. And so it was my coming out story was not nearly as dramatic as my brother's, and I kept it that way. I basically sort of lived by example. I lived not hiding it, but I did invite my girlfriends around my father, and I figured he would just figure it out and that it would be less traumatic for him if he just figured it out. And that's exactly what happened. And when my brother actually got married a few years ago, I always felt like my brother was also really very much involved in the performing arts. And so I always thought when my brother got married, it was almost like a play, the ending to a play where the character that changed the most was my dad. He came around, and it just goes to show that anyone can come around and be accepting of a gay child, their gay child. So that was really my coming out story. My brother used to joke because I kind of alluded to the fact that I might like girls when I was in high school. And he said, Laurie, if you turn gay, I'm going to turn straight. And the reason I tell you that, he was kidding, because at the time, we weren't really, you didn't see a lot of gay people out, and you didn't see a lot of gay people with children. And so we were just joking about that. But when I came out, or, like I said, I kind of almost didn't really come out, but I just sort of lived my best life. Nowadays, I'm living around so many gay people who have children. I have 3 of them. They are my inspirations. I have a 3-year-old daughter named Aiko, and I have a pair of twin boys. They're reciprocal IVF babies. My wife Jenny's eggs, and I was the oven. So we had shirts that said my oven, her bun. I wore that shirt, and then Jenny had a shirt. This is when we posted on Facebook, and it was my bun, her oven. And so our babies were truly a product of the both of us, and we love them so much. They are our entire lives. When people ask me, how many children do you have? I say I have over 100 children, and that's because I also run a performing arts organization called Ohana Arts. We cultivate peace through the arts. We serve 100 children every year in our program, teaching musical theater to kids ages 6 to 18. And we wrote a musical which is touring to Hiroshima called Peace on Your Wings, based on the life story of Sadako Sasaki. And so just the thing that inspires me the most, that was one thing that Kathleen asked me to say, is just that I do what I love. I never feel a day in my life like I'm working. I do what I love, and I love what I do, and my work inspires me. My kids inspire me, and of course my wife Jenny inspires me. Jenny and I met at Yale in grad school, and we have been partners in life and in music and in our performing arts organization. Jenny and I write music together and do all sorts of stuff together, and it's a very, very wonderful partnership. And the last thing,
Laurie, I'm going to have to cut you there and see if we can introduce everyone to your voice, because we have a video of Laurie singing.
Awesome. Thank you for keeping time. I'm bad at it. So yeah, so this video was recorded for a fundraiser I did for a guide dog foundation in Israel, the Guide Dog Center for the Blind in Israel, and features my guide dog, my late guide dog, Mark, who was with me for 7 years. And this is my little tribute to him.
When I am down and oh, my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burdened be, then I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me.
Thank you so much, Laurie. That was exquisite. It moves me, it gives me chills every time I hear you sing.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
And now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Bishop Dr. Karen Olivito. And Karen was the first openly gay, openly LGBTQ bishop in the United Methodist Church. She was the first woman senior pastor at Glide Memorial here in San Francisco, one of the largest Methodist churches, over 12,000 congregants. And she's written 3 books, the latest of which is Together at the Table. And I'll let her tell you all about it. Karen?
Thank you, Kathleen. Laurie, that was unbelievable. Thank you so much for not only your story, but also your music. I was so moved. And Kathleen, thank you for this invitation, for the way you help us tell our stories. And telling stories is central to me. And you've asked me to share a little bit about my coming out story. We all have one, and it's so critical that we learn how to tell them, because stories give life. And every time we tell our story, we're enriched, and those who hear us are enriched. My story is really entwined with my faith. It was the stories of faith that grounded me as a small child. I was drawn into it. And in the community of faith, I learned that I was loved unconditionally and accepted unconditionally. And I just thrived in that environment, and had my call to ministry when I was young, and went to college, went right on to seminary in Berkeley. But there was always this nagging thing I couldn't name about myself. I never felt I fit in, and couldn't figure it out. But I got to seminary in Berkeley, and this is 1980, and there were all these out queer people living out and proud, no closet. And suddenly I had a name for what I felt. And claiming my identity as a lesbian was profound. I felt like I was living more into who I was created to be. And I had no trouble with my relationship with God at that point. I knew that this was who God made me to be, that this God loves me unconditionally, accepts me unconditionally. But it was suddenly this call that I had to serve God through the church, this church that had taught me this unconditional love and acceptance, now made my call and made who I was conditional in the United Methodist Church because of our stance on homosexuality. But my sense of self and my call were stronger than any rule, right? You can't stop the Holy Spirit. Legalism can't do it. And I've served in the church for 40 years. And in 2016, became the first openly gay bishop. And I always have to say that, because people say, oh, what's it like to be the first gay bishop? And I'm like, I'm not. There are people who paved the path ahead of me that I get to walk. And the difference is they were in an era where they couldn't be out. I'm out, and I know I'm paving a path for those who will come after me. And so my writing, Kathleen, you asked me, how has my writing changed hearts and minds? I did write Together at the Table to understand why there's people who were so against my election as bishop. And I wanted to look at, where are we, where does empathy exist in our culture these days so that we can live into another's experience? How do we understand the diversity and divinity? I think they're connected. And I know that using my story to explore these things, people got to look at things in a new way. And part of my story resonated with their story. And so I write stories within the church that no one else is telling, like the history of queer people in the United Methodist Church. I think, what's threatening us today, we can't remain complacent as the queer community. Our rights are being threatened. And so we need, for those who will come after us, we need to keep vigilant. And I'm hoping, Kathleen, you asked me what my ideal vision is for the LGBTQ community. It's that the compassion we finally have for ourselves as we come out, that we can pour that compassion into a world that is bitterly broken and in need of as much love as we can give it.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's been my joy to get to know you. And I'm sure everyone who's ever had any kind of religious background where homosexuality was condemned is delighted to hear a bishop say, God loves you just the way you are.
Amen.
Colm Tóibín, you are my Irish novelist hero. You've written 10 novels. You've been shortlisted and longlisted for the Booker Prize at least 4 times. And you have led the way in marriage equality in Ireland with some of your activities, which I'll let you talk about. Colm Tóibín.
Thank you. I think the problem arose really in Ireland, which was that how do you get legislation through in a very conservative society? The old Victorian laws against homosexuality remained on the Irish statute books because in Irish independence, we took all the English laws, including the ones that put Oscar Wilde behind bars. How do you get this changed? How do you get legislators to think this is serious enough and important enough to change it? And what you were dealing with before anything else was silence, because from the 1960s onwards, the police stopped harassing gay people. There were no court cases. There was no big moment where everyone could assemble to say, this is wrong, it has to be changed. They simply made us invisible. When we looked in the mirror, there was nobody. There was no mention of anyone like you. How do you then move into the light? And one of the ways was to use silence back. Mary Robinson, who was a crusading civil rights lawyer, was elected president of Ireland in 1990. She was very constrained in what she could do. It's a role like the Queen of England. It's or the King now. It's a ceremonial role. All her speeches had to be vetted by the government. So she realized, of course, being a clever lawyer, that I can invite gay people and lesbians to my house and say nothing, welcome them, invite the television, smile, pour tea, make sure they're welcome, introduce them to each other. I don't make a speech, I go silent. But the whole country watches this silence, which becomes more powerful than words. The second time around, I mean, the legislation eventually went through. It was, of course, a woman. It was, of course, a mother. She was a conservative woman from the west of Ireland, and she just thought, this is wrong. And a woman called Mrs. Moore went to see her because she was the minister was going to make the legislation equality to be 21 for gay people, where it was 17 for everyone else. And this Mrs. Moore went to see her and said, what am I to say to my 18-year-old boy? What am I to tell him? And the minister said, you're absolutely right. And she very bravely made it 17. But when it then came to the business of gay marriage, this was going to be a constitutional referendum. So you can just imagine it was an amendment to the country. The whole country was going to vote. And what the organizers, I have to say, I was just one of the players. The people who really thought this through were brilliant, said, why don't, as gay people, we go silent as well? And we ask our sisters, our mothers, and our fathers, more importantly, our fathers, to come to the door, to go from house to house. And that's what they did, house to house, to say to people, will you please help us? Because one of my sons got married recently. It was a wonderful wedding, and this boy can't get married, but he's a boyfriend, and we'd love to have that ritual for him too. Why? And on radio, when I went on radio, for example, to argue with the other side became constrained because they couldn't insult us, because that wouldn't work in a national campaign. People didn't want to hear those insulting words, but what we were to give back to them was their word, the word the Catholic Church has so ruined, the word love. God is love. We're always hearing about love. We say, well, what about my love? And if my love isn't equal to your love, how come? Who decides that? Why do you want to hurt me? Like why? What is it? And of course, if you use that, if you speak slowly, speak softly, never interrupt, but mainly let others speak for you, to say, we love our son as we love our daughter. Our daughter's getting married next month. Why can't our son? And it was a very healing campaign, because we realized we're dealing with a very conservative society still, where people, the thing that really matters in a way is family. And if you make it, it was a conservative campaign to make it pro-family, pro-inclusion, pro-equality for my son as much as my daughter. And that we were, so that was how it was done. And it was, of course, it was helped enormously by the fact that a number of politicians, including the man who's about to become Prime Minister of Ireland again, Leo Varadkar, Leo came out. And Leo is the least likely gay man I know. He's a policy nerd. He's a wonk. He's quite conservative economically and politically. And he just went on radio one morning and said, "Well, as a gay man, and the presenter said, "Hold on, what did you just say?" And so he's become a sort of poster boy in a way for a certain sort of homosexual identity. Of course, there are many other ones which have now emerged since, but we won the campaign. What it was, I think 64-36, and it was a beautiful day in Ireland because it was a campaign run about inclusion. And so I suppose that idea of coming out, to be part of a community rather than to be away from it, I think is something that might matter in America in the more conservative states and in the more conservative places, to say, I want inclusion. I don't want to be different. I want to be different in the way I'm different, but I want to be the same in the rights you have, because I love too. And if you think I don't, how come? And why do you I found the question, why do you want to hurt me? People just couldn't believe this middle-aged man was saying this on radio. And in a way, you have to become vulnerable in order to make these arguments. But so that was really the big Irish story.
Well, Colm, thank you so much for sharing that. I love how the campaign turned the notion of pro-family on its head, because as you know, here in America, pro-family is used as a sword against us. So thank you so much. And I'm excited to read your next book, The Magician, that just won the Rathbone Prize. It's the story of Thomas Mann as a young man. And so I'm looking forward to reading that. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Ardel Haefele-Thomas. Dr. Thomas wrote the very first introduction to transgender studies comprehensive in the world. Dr. Thomas identifies as queer, non-binary, and is an expert in queer Gothic as well. So she has a PhD from, pardon me, I was worried I would say that, and I did, so forgive me. They have a PhD from Stanford in modern thought and literature with a minor in history. So Dr. Haefele-Thomas, take it away.
Thank you, Kathleen. And what a fantastic panel. Colm, thanks for talking about the history of Victorian England and the laws in Ireland. I'm a 19th century British scholar as well, and I'm actually getting ready to embark on a huge project of archival materials, LGBTQI plus British 19th century materials. And I'm actually going to be back in the National Museum of Ireland in the archives. Some great queer people were there during the 1916 Easter Rising. So anyway, also I wanted to say, Colm, really quickly, I actually teach the Irish marriage equality adverts here in my queer studies classes because you all did it right. And they're just so powerful. And my students still love seeing those adverts and talking about them. So anyway, coming out, it's a lifetime process. Coming out as queer, coming out as transgender. I'm both. And, I guess I would say with labels, being trans might actually be the first thing I was aware of. But the first truly kind of coming out in the world, if you will, was as queer. So anyway, but it's always going. But I actually want to turn for a couple of minutes instead and talk about a different kind of coming out. And that is October 11th, 1987, which was the initial National Coming Out Day. And I was marching on Washington for LGBTQI2+ rights. In 1987, we were already 6 years into the AIDS pandemic. Only the year before did our, in my mind, good for nothing president, Ronald Reagan, actually finally utter the word AIDS, even after his friend Rock Hudson had died from it. And so in 1987, here I was with a group of activists from Denver, Colorado, Denver and Boulder. And there were some newspaper accounts say 200,000 people. However, the National Park Service, who went up in the helicopters to see our march, said we had closer to 800,000 to 1 million of us marching on Washington on October 11th, 1987. And the one thing I want to say, I mean, the entire weekend was full of magic, and it was full of just heart wrench and heartbreak, all of it. But what I will say is that that weekend is the turning point of my life and the moment that I said, I can never be in the closet again. I don't care where I am. I'm not going to be in the closet again. And I haven't been. And a huge part of what I do every day with teaching LGBTQI2+ studies, I'm the chair of the department at City College. We're the first LGBTQ+ freestanding department in the United States, the second in the world. Everything I've done from there on has been an act of being out and of not being quiet. And hopefully, without getting too upset about it, I would like to tell people why. Because as we were waiting to march on our nation's capital, and it was, I can't even tell you what an awesome event it was. But as we were there waiting, I just want people to visualize this. There were at least 2,000 or more people who were being pushed in wheelchairs and on gurneys. Okay, in the rain. They had come from all over the United States, predominantly men, gay men, who were dying. Because we had a country and a government who not only didn't care that we were dying, they wanted us dead. And for many of those people, they came from all over. They didn't make it back home. Their last act on earth was to be at this march for full equity, for full civil rights in this country. Bowers versus Hardwick had just passed the year before that solidified the sodomy laws. Those wouldn't fall in the United States until 2003, Lawrence versus Texas. But seeing all of those people covered in KS lesions, IV poles, being pushed along by Whoopi Goldberg, who was there and amazing. And they couldn't leave DC because they were so sick. I thought, I owe it to every single one of them to never be in the closet again. So that's my coming out story. And I thank you. 2 very quick books that changed my life. Shetty Moraga's Loving in the Warriors, Lo que nunca pasó por sus labios. Sorry about my Spanish. And Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider. Kathleen, thank you, and thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Ardel Haefele-Thomas. You are definitely a pioneer and a trailblazer, and I know your work has touched tens of thousands of students at City College of San Francisco in the Queer Studies program. And finally, but certainly not least of all, I would like to introduce Louisa Wall. Louisa Wall is Member of Parliament in New Zealand, has been for 14 years. She's the author of the Marriage Amendment Act that successfully passed in New Zealand. She's a Maori Indigenous representative who is now an ambassador to the Pacific. She quit her post as Member of Parliament. I'll let her address that if she'd like to. And she was appointed the first, by the Foreign Minister, the first gender equality ambassador for New Zealand to the Pacific. Kia ora, welcome, Louisa Wall.
Kia ora, Kathleen, tēnā koutou katoa. And can I begin by saying happy 24th National Coming Out Day. It's my absolute pleasure to be part of this panel, and I acknowledge my fellow panelists. And can I say, Kathleen, that we're all proud and absolutely full of joy to be part of this amazing panel. I really wanted to start with the last question you asked me, and that was, what's your ideal vision for the LGBTIQ+ community? And what I wrote was that all of our health and social needs are met, that the law criminalizes those who abuse and perpetrate violence against us, and that we come out every day, that we are happy, healthy, and participate fully as citizens in our respective countries. And for me, that has been the aspiration as a lawmaker, as a Member of Parliament in New Zealand. And essentially, for me, legislation helps us rewrite history. And so when I talk about that rewriting of history, as Ardel and others talked about, for us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it came about because of colonisation. As a British colony, we inherited all British laws. And so from an Indigenous perspective, as Takatapui, which is what we call our LGBTIQ+ peoples here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, I was never a criminal. I became a criminal through colonisation. And I guess the recognition of that history, the fact that Indigenous peoples globally have been so adversely affected. When I think about my current role as the Ambassador Gender Equality, which means I represent women in all our diversity, and our government has been very clear that our investment in gender equality is not limited to biological women. We're making some, I think, very concrete acknowledgements that gender equality, LGBTI equality are actually one and the same, because the oppressor for all of us has been how the state has viewed us, but also how religion has viewed us as chattels, as being owned by men, and white men predominantly, can I say. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is a decolonisation process. It's helping to develop the architecture within the Pacific for our rainbow voices to be able to advocate for ourselves. In some Pacific countries, it's very difficult because of how we're perceived, how we're seen, how we're demonized, how we're abused, the violence that's perpetrated on us. Hence my kind of vision that the law criminalizes those who abuse us, who perpetuate violence against us. We've had a piece of legislation passed just recently which outlaws conversion practices. We don't call it therapy here because it's not a therapy. It's a practice that has so violently abused so many of us. And so we have now made it a criminal offence. And if you participate in these acts that against the LGBTIQ+ peoples, then you will be punished. So I think that reframing or rewriting of history through legislation is incredibly important. We've only been able to achieve legislative reform in New Zealand because of the community who has fought for us, who has advocated for us. So the legacy that I have inherited from those who changed the initial law around homosexual law reform started in the 70s, and we achieved homosexual law in 1986. But in 8 Pacific countries, we've yet to decriminalise. And so for some people, they don't think it's an issue because they say the law isn't being implemented. that it's there in theory, but in practice, the police are not criminalizing people. But what the police are also not doing is protecting us and ensuring that our health and well-being is protected by the state. Probably just a last couple of statistics. Next year is the 10th anniversary of marriage equality here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And essentially since the bill went through, 700 couples have got married, 700 non-heterosexual couples, can I say. Because our law was very much about marriage equality, because it was the definition that I essentially put into our Marriage Act said marriage was between two people regardless of their sex, sexual orientation or gender identity. And at that point in time, we had 3 couples where people had transitioned and they hadn't been able to register their new sex on their birth certificates because that would have nullified their marriages. And so from the beginning, I was really clear that the trans community had to be specifically catered for, and we managed to do it. So in 2013, 64% support for marriage equality. The last poll in 2016, 74% support. So our support as a community and the currency amongst the general public has just got stronger and stronger. So it's been an absolute privilege to be in a position where I've been able to lead some of that law reform with our community. And just one last thing, next year we will have our first census that will ask everybody about their gender, their sexual identity, and whether or not they have variations of sex characteristics. And we will also be collecting data about what your birth sex was. So we'll be able to, from my perspective, have the evidence, the statistics to hold the public system accountable to how it is specifically meeting our community need. And the one last stat is we have a youth survey every year. And the latest youth survey, 15% of our young people are identifying as members of the SOGS community. So we are the future, and we have to make sure that the environment that our children are growing up in will only ever love, nurture, and embrace them. And hopefully we have moved on from that legacy, that archaic British legacy of our criminalisation histories. So thanks again for the invitation to join you. And to my fellow panelists, I've enjoyed listening to all of your contributions this afternoon. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you so much, Louisa. And thank you to all our panelists for being here on National Coming Out Day. I'm going to turn it over now to Nora, the program director, to advise us of questions. And the questions will be for the whole panel. So if we could all come back on camera and we'll participate.
Yes, thank you all for joining us. We have some questions coming in from the audience, and I want to encourage everybody to feel free to drop those in the Q&A box that you'll find on your screen by pushing the Q&A button. But I want to say that I went through the full gamut of emotions listening to all of your amazing stories. And, I think one question that came to me and that I always like to ask people at an event like this is, at a time like now, when there is still a lot of reason for fear and anger, especially here in the US as we're facing down a midterm election, what is giving you hope these days as you're looking ahead for yourself and for your community?
I know it's hard to have hope at a time like this, so I'm going to ask Ardel, because you're at the forefront of giving students hope. What would you say?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I realized I went with the past, and I love that Louisa went with the future, right? And obviously they go together. What gives me incredible hope, there are a couple of things actually. Number one, Syria. No, not Syria, sorry. Well, now I'm going to forget what I was going to say. Anyway, we just had marriage equality pass in the first Eastern European nation last week. And forgive me, I've now completely blanked on that. Somebody else will be able to tell me. I put it in all of my classes. There are also obviously things to be really depressed about around the world. But for me personally, what gives me hope is that in my LGBT studies classes at City College, I'm teaching 7 classes this semester. They're all online and fully asynchronous. And I would say up and down the state of California, everybody who's registering, I would say my students are now in those classes identifying about 70% of them are identify as heterosexual. And they are coming to class because they want to support family. They want to support their children. They, I mean, I had a mom of a young trans man come to class because she quote unquote, this was literally what she said, I don't want to be an idiot and alienate him. And what's even better is he's now in my class. He's now college age. But it's that I have so many people who are educators and healthcare workers and first responders who want to come and do LGBT studies work and understand so that when they're on the job, they can make that a safer space. So that gives me incredible hope.
That's a great insight, Ardel. Let me ask Laurie, you also work with youth. What gives you hope these days for our community?
Well, I think what gives me hope is our students are so open about coming out. And in fact, now, there's so many more, I'm so not up with the times. There's now pan, there are words that I don't even know that I'm trying to get acquainted with as somebody who works with youth. I have students coming out to me all the time. And I think it's really, really nice for Jenny and I to head up an organization with students, many of which who identify as queer or trans or what have you. We have students who are very open in our program. And of course, theater is a very safe community for LGBTQIA students, but I mean, who are very open about saying, oh, I have a crush on this person, like a lot of same-sex crushes, and they don't even think twice about it. When I was growing up, we were afraid to come out to people. And I've given concerts around the country in places where they have Bible stuff up and saying, are you going to heaven or hell? And I know that's not a safe place where I can, come out, but it's nice to know that the students that I work with here in Hawaii, and Hawaii is a very liberal place, but it's also a very small sort of community. And it was a place, I think, where Jenny was telling me that she felt that she didn't know any other gay people at the time. And so now to see kids so open about it, and they're so, we are actually also marching in the Pride Parade, this Honolulu Pride Parade this weekend. And it's really nice. I'm also, and this is going to sound kind of ironic, but because our rights are being compromised, I also feel hope because up until now, I think our generation has had it pretty, I don't want to say has had it easy, but certainly easier than they did in the 90s. And so coming out hasn't been the same kind of struggle as it was for us in a lot of ways. And so the fact that now they've witnessed Roe v. Wade being overturned, and now knowing that our rights are being threatened next, gay marriage being, I think in a way having a bit of sort of that threat is kind of getting them all riled up and getting them to be impassioned about something they sort of took for granted. And I think having struggles in a way is very important because we can get very sort of cavalier about this kind of stuff, and knowing that our rights are never, we're never out of the woods, that there's always something we're going to have to fight for. I think it's really important for for these like Gen Z and generations coming after them to know that people have fought for their rights and that they're going to have to fight for their rights and the rights of those in the future. And I think the fact that they're getting impassioned about these issues that are coming up, and the fact that there could be a threat to gay marriage, I think it's really important for them to see that it's not history. This is something that's continuous. Jenny and I got married. We were supposed to have a civil union But in 2013, on her birthday, on Jenny's birthday, on June 26th, gay marriage became federally recognized. And I remember thinking that all of a sudden, for me to say wife, like it became so much easier. It became so much more like people just accepted it. And there was no, I think that federal recognition really made a huge difference. And so I think for our students, seeing us as the heads of this organization, it's really important for them to know, what we had to fight for to get those rights, and that we're never going to be out of the woods.
Thank you, Laurie, for that story, because that is our story. And Colm, you teach at Columbia. I know you don't teach queer studies, but does it ever come up in your classes?
Yeah, I think things have really changed. I think you found an extraordinary liberalism and openness, and really a whole new way, I think, of dealing with gender. No matter what text you're using, it doesn't matter what it is. For example, with something like James Joyce's Ulysses, which no one thinks that was a gay book, but nonetheless, it raises extraordinary questions about gender and about identity, and not only about racial identity, but actually about sexual identity. So no matter what book you're using now, these questions, which really arise from feminism and from the gay movement, these questions have been put on the agenda. The other thing I want to say is that there's a sort of code involved now where if you want to judge a country or a politician, start with a gay thing. So Putin, what did he say about gay people? What was that thing he said first? And from then you get the rest. Viktor Orban, the Prince bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. In other words, before the war, you get a coded set of statements. Watch them carefully, because if you think the gay questions about liberation and freedom are marginal in any way, watch who's using gay hatred, because they'll come for you no matter who you are next. They'll invade your country next. Watch them, because the gay question has become a sort of code, a way for them to, in a way, flex their muscles first, or establish somehow a sort of power. But it's a funny power, and it's a very dangerous power. And it's interesting that the place where the law actually did change in Europe, in Eastern Europe, is Slovenia rather than Slovakia or Croatia, because Slovenia has always been the strange liberal country. They didn't go to war in the Yugoslav war. The punk rock movement was as important as anything else in getting them freedom from Yugoslavia. So it's interesting that every time you can judge, what I'm saying is, you can judge a country by its response to gay liberation, and you can also see dangers coming when politicians begin to spout against gay people. Then watch what they'll do next, because that's a sort of code.
Wow, that's yeah. I was in Budapest, and I have a dear friend who's a gay activist in Hungary, and he is faced now with the Orban sweep throughout Hungary. He was on a Nazi hit list back in the 90s, and now he's also a man really targeted by the government. Right. They'll come for you next. That will end on that note. Questions, Nora? Is there one more question, I think?
Yes, we have one more question in the Q&A from another Nora, not me. And this Nora asks, in starting an inclusivity club at the high school where I work, what types of focus might work on, given that this is a pretty conservative campus?
Let me turn that question back to the entire panel, and whoever deals with youth might want to answer it. Maybe Karen, you could talk about, because you're in a fairly conservative Mountain Sky conference.
Well, I don't know if my churches aren't conservative, thank goodness. But what I find is in inclusivity, how to bring diverse voices in to tell their stories. To get them to write their own stories, to listen to one another, to build up the ability to hear and to tell, and let that be the building block and the creation of safe space, so that those stories can go deeper and deeper and deeper.
Anyone else?
I mean, I think if you just take the words, just take two words, love and family. And if you want to do a group, a set of seminars on the question of love, and then suddenly all sorts of love, parents for children, people for each other, strangers suddenly becoming lovers. And then suddenly these in a conservative place, it's one way of sort of trying to bring people in. The other word is family. And who calls a family? How does a family come together? What does a family mean? So I think that if you just take the conservative words and say, actually, if you don't mind, I know those words. I belong to those words as much as you do. And so just take love, take family. And in a way, you've got to play a game in a way of not telling them what it is you're really looking for, which is that you want to be not only loved, but included, and you want that to be public, and you want that to be fully recognized. And that is actually a radical position in a conservative society, which in a way you've got to keep that radicalism just down below the radar for the moment, while you insinuate various ideas about that I too love, and I too am a family, come from a family, want to be in a family. So, it's in a conservative place, it's just a question of making sure that that your voice stays soft. And that you just bring people in one by one. You get your grandmother first. You get your grandmother who's the most likely to listen. And then the big one is to get your father.
I love that strategy.
Can I say something, Kathleen?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. Having interesting conversations about the concept of belonging at the moment, and belonging in the sports space. We're having quite intense discussions about trans athletes and trans athletes' ability to play in the secondary school sports area and at what level. And I've been really clear that everybody has the right from a first principles approach to be who they are. And once you are who you are, and that may mean that you have to have certain health and social service provision. But then from a public good perspective, you have the right to fully participate as an equal citizen in our countries. And that sense of belonging, I think as a concept, then enables us to talk about intersectionality. Because there are many aspects of our identities. I mean, being LGBTIQ+, and being a woman, and being Indigenous, or being a migrant or a refugee, or having a disability, or whatever it might be, I've started to talk about spaces that enable people to belong. And we all need that sense of belonging to obviously create a base of, for us, the Māori concept is called tūranga waiwai. You need a place to stand that reinforces who you are based on your identities. And so I think a lot about our Indigenous perspectives and a lot of these things. Now, that probably won't fly in a conservative community, but I think the concept of belonging and allowing people to talk about the different aspects of the self, or themselves, and doing that through a multitude of ways, whether it be, as Colm said, families, stories from our grandparents, because what we're talking about is shared experiences and shared values and understandings that will help. We call it to weave us together. Tuia tangata is the Māori term for my role as an ambassador. And that's about how we weave people together and try and address issues that have historically divided us. And when we think about that conceptualization around LGBT, it's always been used to divide certain groups in our society off from the rest of us. And anyway, I think having discussions about belonging, and also what type of world we want our children to live in, and do we want our children to be resilient? Well, they will only ever be resilient if their identities are uplifted and they can use their language and culture to express themselves. And I'm sorry I cut you off, Laurie.
Oh, no, not at all. It was incredibly inspiring to hear all of these things. And mine was actually a very, just a very sort of logistical answer in that when I do public concerts, a lot of times what I do is I go out into the community and I do presentations and I read passages from my book at high schools and middle schools. And I love that you're starting an inclusivity, like a group and trying to, I think one of the things that I'll never forget this event that I did in Rock Springs, Wyoming. And you can imagine it was in the middle of nowhere. And Jenny and I performed a song that we wrote called The Girl I Am. And it's basically the message of it is it gets better, meaning that when you're at your lowest, when you feel alienated, when you've had the worst thing happen to you, that questions your identity, just know that it's going to get better, that you're going to have this wonderful life afterward. You just have to, as you said, bounce back, be resilient, come out of it. And you will have, as long as you have the right people around you, it's going to get better. We perform, I'm going to get emotional. We performed this song and the entire group started crying. And it was just, it really made me realize that no matter where you are in the country, there are people suffering, whether they're queer or whether they're overweight, whether they're dealing with eating disorders, no matter what it is. It doesn't matter where you are in the country. And this was the same place where I said earlier that we were driving by places that said, are you going to heaven or hell? Which is why I'm so glad, Karen, that you spoke and that you're helping people kind of navigate through religion and see what's really important and how religion can sort of save you. But I think one of the things that you could do is bring in speakers, bring in artists, bring in musicians, bring in people who speak from the most vulnerable levels. Assemblies work really well in schools or like in small groups. And so that you can get these kids to be vulnerable and to express who they are in front of each other and to feel brave. If anything, our music, and it's humbled us every time, like how brave it makes people feel because they need it so much. I didn't expect to get emotional. But I would just say, definitely bring in all kinds of speakers who have been through different things, because your kids are going to like all of a sudden feel brave enough to be like, guess what? I'm trans. Oh, I never realized this, but I think I might be gay, or, I've been dealing with this. And it's just, this is why I love education. This is why I feel like I have 100 kids, because if we can help people in their formative years, it makes the hugest difference. And so I would just say to anyone like Nora or anyone else who's starting some sort of a program at the youth level is just to get them around people, bring people in who can speak from a variety of different circumstances, because you'll see how this brings so much hope to your kids who have no idea how life can get better and how they're not alone.
Thank you so much, Laurie, and never apologize for getting emotional. That's what makes you a great artist.
Oh, well, thank you.
And thank you to all of you tonight. Colm Tóibín, the Irish novelist who's continuing to stir things up. Dr. Karen Olivito, the bishop, who's out and proud and teaching her congregants the message of love across the intersections. Dr. Ardel Haefele-Thomas, who's breaking barriers and continuing to raise up the next generation of queer pathfinders. Sidney Grant, who is raising up kids in New York City public schools. I've seen him do it. It's amazing. Through dance, he's teaching manners and footwork and fun and a whole lot more. Louisa Wall, who is a phenomenal humanitarian and not afraid to stand up for human rights across the spectrum. I think I have everyone. Did I get everyone? And I want to thank Nora Peel and Sammy Roberts and Scott Gelfand of the Bay Area Book Festival for having us tonight. Thank you.